Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Audit Committee. I'll start off by apologising for the sound of my voice, and if I break down halfway through this meeting, I've just got over a rather nasty cough and cold, and it's knocked it out of me a bit. Anyway, good evening again. I'd particularly like to welcome those members of the public and press watching the live stream. As with all technology, there's always the possibility of something going wrong. If anything should go wrong, I will adjourn the meeting until the issue has been resolved. If we are unable to resolve the issue, it will be necessary to postpone the rest of the meeting. Brings us on to the agenda, and agenda item 1 is public question time. Patrick, do you have any public questions? No public questions. Agenda item 2, apologies and substitutions. Patrick, and I know we have no apologies and substitutions.
No apologies.
Thank you. Agenda item 3 is declarations of interest. Does any member have any interests to declare for any items on the agenda? If not, it brings on to agenda item 4, the minutes, to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of July 2024. I'm happy with the minutes, and from the chair I'll propose. Do I have a seconder to approve the minutes?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pettit.
Yeah. Chair, I'm happy to approve, but may I ask a question about it?
Certainly.
The last but one paragraph on page 8, I made a suggestion about financial planning for net zero, and I was wondering if that suggestion has been taken forward, or could we have an update? If not now, then maybe at the next meeting.
Yeah, can we make a note to bring that to the next meeting, because I don't have one with me at this precise moment in time. Agenda item 5 is chair's announcements. I have 2 announcements today. Firstly, I would like to welcome Patrick Adams to his first meeting of this committee. Patrick has recently joined us in Democratic Services. Welcome. And secondly, I would like to make a change to the agenda to the effect of asking Mark Hodgson of EY, our external auditors, to give us a verbal update on where we're at with the 2023-24 external audit. And we'll take that immediately following item 8, the 2022-23 statement of accounts. And that concludes my announcements. Brings us on to agenda item 6, annual governance statement for 23-24. Can I ask John Hill to introduce this item?
Thank you, Chairman. Before I start, just to note, Stephen, the net zero point was brought up in the annual governance statement. We made a brief change to reflect that. I'm sure Ian will be very happy to update the committee next time around. Chairman, you'll be pleased to know that very much at the final stages now of the annual governance statement. All members had the opportunity to make comments. I'd like to particularly thank Stephen, who made a number of comments, which I hope we've resolved and made the document a lot better. I also thank you for allowing me to put his general comment in paragraph 4.2, which reflects, I think, positively on the documents in front of you. Apologies about the appendix 3, but now all appendices should reflect responses to comments by members, whether at previous meetings or during the consultation period. And I'm happy to point to members for the recommendations in 2.1. Thank you.
Thank you, John. From the chair, I'll propose the recommendations as set out at 2.1. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second, Chair.
Councillor Horgan. Members, any comments or questions to John? Steve.
I'd just like to expand on what is referred to in paragraph 4.2, which is, I think this is a fulsome document that really does demonstrate how seriously the council is taking governance matters. And I'd like to thank the Chief Exec for seeking comments and for responding so fully to the ones I made. And I'm very happy with the results of that and the amendments made. I'm happy to support the recommendation as a non-voting member. But could I ask a question about the potential area for further development on principle E on page 21 of the document and page 35 of our pack? And it's to what extent the council and its leadership team is doing some work to understand the risks and opportunities around AI.
Thank Stephen for giving us future notice of that, and I think Ian is going to respond. Ian, please.
Yeah, I mean, the council, to be honest, hasn't embraced AI at this point. Obviously, we're a relatively small council and the resource hasn't been there to embrace AI at this point, but clearly it's something which we will need to do at some point in the future.
Any further comments or questions to officers? Not, we'll move to the debate. Members, anything you wish to debate about this? I have to say I found it comprehensive. I had to stop myself asking some questions when I remembered that we were doing 23-24 and not 22-23 when I was looking at the accounts, etc. But such is the way of the world. If not, we have a recommendation in front of us. All in favour, please show. Thank you. Thank you, John. Brings us on to agenda item number 7, external audit results report for 2022-23, not 23-24 as it says on the printed agenda. Mark Hodgson, can I ask you to introduce the report?
You can, thank you. Good evening. So a long-awaited report in respect of your 22-23 financial year, and follows hot on the heels of legislation being enacted on the 30th of September, which I'll talk more about in a moment, alongside the new National Audit Office Code of Audit Practice, which was enacted last week on the 14th of November. So we have now followed that code and completed the following in relation to our 22-23 audit. So we had previously reported to you on the 9th of April, which our interim value for money report, which we presented to this committee on the 16th of July, the summary of which is in section 5 of this report. For this committee, there are no new risks of weakness in the council's underlying arrangements and no new weaknesses to bring to your attention, which flows through into the audit opinion within this completion report. Moving on to financial statements. So we have performed the minimum procedures required under international standard of auditing to be able to move to a disclaimed audit opinion in line with the statutory instrument 907, the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2024, which was enacted on the 30th of September. Those procedures are mainly in relation to audit risks, and section 2 sets out those audit risks. Materiality, again, section 2, page 12, and then in relation to our understanding of the entity, its business and fraud risks, which we did through letters issued to management, chair of this committee, internal audit, and the monitoring officer. In terms of reporting, because we only performed limited procedures in relation to this audit, we do not have any control observations to note on page 19 of our report, and we do not have any audit differences to note on pages 18 and 20. Though we have noted that you as a committee should ensure in your approval process that all comparatives, casting and any movements from original published draft statements are acknowledged through the report that Ian has provided. Disclaimer, which is set out on page 8 of our report. This gives you the background of why we're not able to perform our audit over the 22-23 accounts. It also sets out, therefore, that we need to move to the disclaimed audit opinion to adhere to the government's legislation and the 13th of September 2024 backstop date. That then links to the opinion wording, which is in section 4, and the most important paragraph is the basis for disclaimed opinion on page 23. That again, links to the legislation and links to the reason that we set out on page 8. As a committee, you will still need to approve your 2023 financial statements, which is on the agenda, noting any adjustments from the draft set published on the 30th of September 2023, and provide a letter of representation, which again is agenda item 8, appendix 2 today. We would then be looking to sign our audit opinion on this Friday, which would be the first opportunity if the NAO publish their whole of government accounts conclusion, allowing auditors to be able to certify their conclusion on their audit. So appreciate it's an unusual audit completion report, but hopefully that's a whiz through the key bits, but clearly happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, so certainly different to previous years. Members, any comments or questions to Mark as our external auditor? Councillor Horgan.
Thank you, Mark. Hi. Yeah, I've obviously read the statement that you're going to be able to only issue a disclaimed audit report. And because that's quite unusual, yeah, I can read the words on page 23, but I'm hoping maybe you can just, I'm as interested to understand what the future impacts might be, because I seem to remember somewhere that, you know, by not being able to do the job completely now, that could have an impact on what happens in future years and the work that you have to undertake going forward. Like, you know, somebody has done something wrong, and now you know, for the next few years you've got to check a bit deeper, for want of a better expression. So I think first of all I'll stop there and just see if you can just help educate me a little bit about the impact going forward of a disclaimed audit report, please.
Actually, Mark, before you finish, also for context, if you've got it, no, I'm sorry, I should have asked you this in advance. As I say, for context, really, do we know how many disclaimed reports are going to be? And I am imagining it's going to be quite a lot. Thanks.
Indeed. I don't know the exact number as of today, but we have in excess of 200 as a firm. So we have 25% of the market in this audit year. So I'd have to do the maths off the top of my head, but a significant number.
Great.
So, Councillor Horgan, your question is a very good one. So I'll answer it in stages. So the external audit is only a third line of defence for your financial statements and your financial affairs. So I think as a committee, you'd be equally reliant on Ian as Section 151 officer and assurances he can provide that nothing bad has happened, to use your phrase, and indeed internal audit in the work that they do through head of internal audit opinion. What does a disclaimed audit report mean? It means we have not been able to perform any procedures over these financial statements, so can't provide any assurance. In 22-23, the FRC helpfully issued an accessible guide 2 months ago, which sets out what then happens if you have a disclaimed audit report, and it ordinarily takes 3 or 4 financial periods subsequent to that disclaimed audit opinion to get back to a clean audit opinion, all things being equal, because you have an issue over opening balances, then comparatives, then closing balances, and you have to work through that stage by stage. So the next part of the government's proposal is the recovery stage, and that recovery stage is to rebuild assurance, which basically means how can you get the audit assurance you would have got from 22-23, but by performing procedures in subsequent audit years to kind of rebuild it back up to get to the full picture, to be able to get to an unqualified audit opinion. So that will be 4 financial years hence from today. So every year when we do our audit results report, and I touch on this in agenda item 9 for 23-24, you will see what assurances we have been able to build through standard audit tests in that year relating to that set of accounts, and therefore what is left outstanding from this disclaimed audit opinion. And hopefully that list will get smaller and smaller each year until it is 0.
So 4 years,
for financial
yeah,
years, yeah,
no remission for good behaviour.
if only.
I'll concede Stephen to ask his question.
Yeah, building on from that, firstly, thank you for the good and clear report. It is unusual, but in the circumstances, I think it's clearly explained. Out of context, a disclaimed opinion could be quite startling to the council taxpayers and residents of the district. And I think it's very important the audit committee provides onward messaging to the council that provides the proper context about the fact that, frankly, and to use blunt language, this has been an audit industry failure outside of the control of the council. Mark, could you comment on whether or not the council could have done anything to avoid this disclaimer opinion? And I've got supplementaries, but if you can respond to that point.
So I would come back and say it's a local audit sector issue, not just audit suppliers, because there's elements of professional reporting that have fallen down and a number of reporting issues in the sector that have led to it. So there's a well-trailed set of rationale behind how we've got to kind of this doomsday day, if you like, and the reasons behind it, of which audit suppliers are a part of it for sure. The FRC have equally, alongside the accessible guide, provided supporting information which may support councils in how you provide press releases alongside this disclaimed audit opinion being published alongside your financial statement. So there is that support there available because it is a unique, once in a lifetime, hopefully, a set of circumstances which government is trying to resolve through this legislation.
Thank you. So just to confirm, for avoidance of doubt, is there anything the council could have done to avoid this particular outcome?
Apologies, I forgot to come back onto that. So in the set of circumstances before us, there is nothing the council could have done.
Thank you. I think it's very helpful in terms of how this committee might guide and advise the full council. And it would be too easy to assume that the audit has had no value at all, but I want to understand, within the limitations of the disclaimer, are there any aspects where the council and its residents can actually take some positive assurance? So, for example, you've noted that there are no significant internal control weaknesses, which I think is quite a helpful thing. But are there any other things that we can say is an area of positive assurance that the audit has delivered?
Again, just to caveat what you said, we've not identified any control weaknesses because we haven't performed sufficient audit procedures to do so. So a double negative, if you like. What I would focus on as a committee is the value for money work that we have done, because part of our strategy was, in order to provide taxpayers with assurance, it is over value for money. So the commentary on value for money, the fact that we haven't reported any other matters as a weakness in the council's arrangements is key, because value for money looks at the underpinning arrangements any local authority has in place to conduct its business. Therefore, really important on a daily and a yearly basis how you go about discharging those responsibilities. So the fact we have not found any significant weaknesses and reported as such is significant assurance within the context of we haven't done the audit on the set of financial statements. So there's two legs to what we have done, and that was a specific choice because that assurance is key.
Understood. I think that's incredibly helpful, and again, I think our onward messaging should reflect that. I have a further point to explore, but I'm happy to defer to others.
Councillor Organ.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just building on these points. I'm looking at page 7 of your reports, page 59 in the pack, in the second paragraph, and I read, the Audit Committee, which is us, as the council's body charged with governance, has an essential role in ensuring that there's assurance over both the quality of the draft financial statements prepared by management and the council's wider arrangements, blah, blah, blah. I guess what I'm looking for is that specifically, is there any advice that you can give us, the Audit Committee, to help us improve our ability to assure the quality of the draft financial statements going forward, because I'm guessing they're going to be very key to making sure they're not only accurate but timely. So yeah, any pointers that you can give us to improve matters whilst we're in this recovery phase, and therefore it hopefully become common practice going forward, that you can give would be much appreciated.
Thank you. And I think context is important here, because we haven't identified any failures in your own processes that have led to us not being able to do your audit. And that is not a case across a number of audits that I referenced earlier, where there have been delays in council's ability to prepare accounts and publish accounts. So we have reported value for money, other matters in a number of cases where that is key. So there is comfort for you that this is not part of the process. I think going forward into a recovery phase, as you say, there are two important elements. One is the publishing of the draft accounts by the deadline set in the account and audit regulations, which is going to change for 24-25 to give an extra month for Ian and finance team to prepare that. And it historically used to be that those draft accounts had to come to committee. That was withdrawn as a specific action, though is still regarded as good practice and still happens here. So you do have an opportunity to see those draft accounts before we get our hands on them, so to speak, and do audit procedures. The second key point, I think, is the appointment of an independent member to this committee who has specific knowledge, expertise in this area, and therefore can support you as a committee in that review process, and then questioning the auditor when we do our audit plan, present that, and our audit findings when we present that on each one. And again, that's recommended by SIPFA as good practice. It is not 100% enacted across all councils currently, though. I would say most are going towards that.
Thank you. Stephen, you said you had a further point you wanted to explore.
Sorry. Page 21 of the reports, page 73 of our pack. And you drew attention to this in your voiceover, which is that when approving the accounts, the council, or rather this committee on the council's behalf, should ensure that all prior year comparatives agree. In a few minutes, the committee is going to be asked to approve this. I wondered if either Ian or yourself could comment on how this committee can be sure that the prior year comparatives do agree to the final set of the prior year statements of accounts.
Ian, are you coming in on that one?
I mean, I think in relation to prior years, the committee should be reassured that those all prior years up to this year have been approved by EY as our external auditors as a true reflection of the position. So there should be confidence in the prior years, and as you know, clearly there are the comparisons between this set of accounts and previous accounts is detailed in the documentation, as much that 2 years are presented side by side. So there is the opportunity to identify if there are variations between years, and I don't believe there are anything. I believe the set of accounts in front of you is a true reflection, and on that basis you should be comfortable about approving them.
I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further on, Councillor Horgan?
Yeah, I just got a couple of more questions. Hopefully they're pretty quick. On page 70 of the pack, which is 18 of your report, status of the audit, it says our audit work in respect of the council opinion is substantially complete. Just trying to get a sort of a feel for what do you mean by substantially. Are we talking 70%, 80%, 90%, 2%? Can you wet finger in the air? I know I'm not going to hold you to it specifically, but have you got a feel for percentage wise?
Well, 95 plus, we've only got those 2 bullet points to go, which are the procedures we do on Friday once we get all the signed documentation from Ian.
And if I may just continue, Chair.
Yeah.
And I just want, and again, if I'm repeating sort of some of the stuff that's been said earlier, I apologise, but on page 80 of the pack, which is page 28 of your report, where you say, where you mention that obviously a significant governance risk was identified on how the council ensures it makes its informed decisions. I'm right in understanding, because I do apologise, literally only got hold of these 24 hours ago and speed read through them. I just want to satisfy myself that that relates to the timing of when the draft statement of accounts was made available, which we understand the reasons why they were delayed, but specifically that's what that governance risk relates to. Is that correct? Yeah.
That is correct, yes. So our risk was that the council was late compared to the specified date in the account and audit regulations in preparing and publishing its draft financial statements for this year. So it was 2 months late. And then that was the risk. We then did some work around why that had happened and satisfied ourselves that there was no systemic underlying fault in the arrangements. Previous year's audit was late and therefore needed to play catch up. 2 months was deemed to be reasonable in that context, and therefore that has not led to a significant weakness and therefore an other reporting matter.
Thank you. That's the answer I was hoping for.
Thank you, Mark. Stephen?
Yeah, a comment and then a final question for Mark. I think the comment would be that I think the explanations we've had are very, very helpful, and I think this committee has a role in helping the management and the auditors and the organisation draw a line and move forward as far as possible, and say essentially accept that this is where we are. It's outside of the council's control, and in the circumstances we've made the best of it. Is my sort of reading of it. And I think, Mark, your answers today I found incredibly helpful. Thank you. And Ian's. So a general question in the depth of the appendices then on page 97 of our pack. I can't tell what page it is of your report because it's overprinted. It's in relation to non-compliance with laws and regulations, and in the top right-hand corner of that page, you or your firm says that there's been an increase in these matters over the last sort of 3 years. I just wondered what you put that down to, and is there anything specific for this council that you would want to highlight about?
So we have seen a significant increase in the number of matters that get deemed to be non-compliant with laws and regulations because the banner is relatively broad. And it can be, it's not just laws as in laws of the country, it is laws as in standing orders, financial regulations as well. I think coming out of COVID, especially, and remote working arrangements and changes to a standard operating practice, if you would, that were well established pre-COVID, there have been weaknesses in how a number of authorities have enacted normal course of business. That has given rise to a number of those. Equally, I think there's more awareness that auditors are looking at these things, and more whistleblowing has come through in the same period, if you like. Any whistleblower that comes either to the council, to us as a prescribed person, is automatically deemed as a non-compliance matter at initial glance until proved otherwise. And the role of the armchair auditor in that, I think, has become more prevalent as well over the same period. So it's just been a steady rise over a culmination of factors building to that statement we have on that page.
Anything specific or directly relevant to this council that you'd want to highlight?
Nothing specific at this point in time. Clearly, to my right, Rachel provides significant assurance to you around standing orders, financial regulations, head of internal audit, opinion covers key financial systems. Equally, haven't had a formal objection to the accounts in my tenure that I can recall off the top of my head. But they usually come left field when you're least expecting them. So I don't think you can take any assurance that you haven't necessarily had any, but clearly an objection can only be that an item of account is unlawful or they want the auditor to report in the public interest. So the very fact you've got a very detailed annual governance statement that sets out all the methodology, approach and detailed action plans together with all the work that Rachel does, I think provides you with assurance as a committee. But I would say complacency is not an area to be trodden into on this matter.
Thank you very much. Can we now move on to agenda item number 8, which is the 2022-23 statement of accounts, and can ask Ian to introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just say one thing in relation to the previous item, though, before I start, obviously concern was raised about governance and the late publication of our draft accounts for 22-23. If I can just say, some of you will know that the 23-24 accounts were published within the required timetable. So it was just a one-off in 22-23 because of the issues of the late audits and the like. So going on to the statement of accounts in front of you, these are the statement of accounts for 22-23, which require approval from committee this evening, which will then allow Mark to finish his procedures, hopefully on Friday, to get them disclaimed and then we can then publish formally. As detailed in the covering report, there's been a number of, or 2 relatively small changes since the draft version. The audit, which is going on for 23-24, has identified a couple of grants which we were carried forward as receipts in advance, as opposed to putting them into a reserve account and carrying forward in that way. So in relation to the management accounts, which the council has already approved, makes no difference whatsoever, but it does in relation to the statutory accounts. And so therefore, we've made that change for 23-24, but obviously backdated it into these 22-23 accounts. So that's the only change. I also just wanted to mention that you've got a copy of the letter of representation in front of you. EY nationally have changed some of the wording on that, which literally came out yesterday. So the version which I will be asking David to sign is slightly different to the version in front of you now, but materially is unchanged. I'm happy to, if members want to see a copy of the final version, I'm sure David would be comfortable with sharing that with you in advance of signing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Now, from the chair, I will propose recommendation as set out in 2.1 that we do approve these. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pettit. Members, comments or questions to Ian before we move into the debate? Councillor Organ.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm looking at page 113 of the report, and specifically the line non-domestic rates. I've got that right, haven't I? Yes. And obviously 22% variance between budget and outturn. Just really looking for a bit of clarification as to how that came about, please.
Yeah, that's much of that is in relation to relatively prudent assumptions in relation to business rates. Business rates can vary considerably in year. Council tax is different in so much that you decide at the start of the year how much you're going to draw from council tax, and that is fixed. Business rates, particularly because of Section 31 grants, can differ from the amount which you put into the budget, and that is a consequence of this. And also, we're a part of the Cambridgeshire business rates pool, which is in has an advantage to us, and it's historically difficult, therefore, to quantify the amount of business rates you're going to receive each year.
So I can't put it down to an overzealous collection agency. I'm now sitting on that committee.
I'm sure you can encourage them to do that in the future, but not at the moment. Thank you.
So, yeah, as the sort of lay member, I would be supportive of the committee approving the accounts tonight. I think they are a perfectly good, solid set of accounts. I think Ian and his team's done a good job in preparing them. Ian, I emailed earlier with a handful of very minor observations for you to consider, but nothing I need to raise here. So the only question I have referencing the earlier discussion is, because the auditor has placed specific importance on this point, Ian, could you assure the committee that the prior year comparatives here are correct?
I have every confidence they are correct.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Horgan.
Thank you, Chair. And as I say, I did have to speed read this, so my questions somewhat a matter of clarification. I'm looking at page 136 of the pack. And our friends, the Community Infrastructure Levy, SIL. I'm reading that as of the 31st of March 2023, there was 10.654 million sitting in the SIL pot. Is that reading that correctly? Fantastic, thank you. That's good. I was looking, if I can continue, Chair, yes, Mayor? Yeah. I was looking, again, this is a clarification question, the transfers out in 2021-22 and 22-23, and that suggests that transfers out of the SIL pots in those two financial years was nothing in 21-22 and £9,000 in 22-23. Now, I'm assuming that those figures don't include the money that's paid to town and parish councils. Is that correct?
Yes, SIL is dealt with as in a revenue account during the course of the year. So expenditure like movements to parish councils would be a charge to that revenue account, and obviously the income goes into the revenue account, and then the movement, the net impact of that revenue account is moved as one transaction at the end of the year into the SIL reserve.
Right. Okay, so for instance, in the 22-23 transfer out across the whole of the year, there was a change of around £9,000 in total across that period of the year. Is that how I should be reading that?
No, it's the transfers out aren't shown as specific entries. It's the transfer in is the net amount. I'm not sure what that 9,000 is, to be honest, but it's not particularly material. But I can assure you that the final figure of the 10,654 is the correct balance in that reserve at the end of the year.
Okay. Okay, so it doesn't include that. So if the town and parish council, the money goes that you know, my son town council, for example, doesn't appear in that row, but is on a revenue line somewhere else. What about anything that the council spends SIL money on? Does that appear in this line, or is that again in a revenue line somewhere else?
This, as answered previously, this is the reserve balance, and simply the net impact of the revenue account at the end of the year is put into this reserve balance. So this is the net impact of all the transactions you're talking about and all the income we receive all go through one revenue account, and then the net balance is moved into this reserve.
I'll leave that point there. Sorry, I'll leave that point there. But I think I'm probably going to confuse myself even more if I if I carry on. I'm leaping now to page 146, the long-term debtors. Where in note 16, I see that from 21-22 to 22-23, that increased from 319,000 to 322. So it would appear that in the last few financial years, we're increasing the loans made to long-term debtors. Have we got any information in the report anywhere as to what that line relates to in terms of who the individuals or private sector is, or how they're broken down, or just what is it about, so that I can understand, you know, is it funding John Hill's trip to South America, or I don't know.
These are loans usually to homeowners for improvements to the home, disabled facilities, things, etc. And they are secured, where they're of high value, they're secured against the value of the home and expected to be repaid by the resident at a certain point.
That's me finished, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Right, members. Do we need to debate this any further? I think we've had messages of support all around. So can I put to the meeting that we do or the recommendation at 2.1 and approve this statement of accounts? All in favour, please show. Thank you. Mark, I think if we could come back to 2023-24 external audit next. I think you've covered most of it already in the earlier discussion. If you could give us an update, I'd be grateful.
No, sure. So in relation to 23-24, so we've previously brought our audit plan to you. You published your draft financial statements as Ian set out. We undertook our core field work from July through to late September. That audit work is now subject to review and just top up testing where needed, and a few trailing issues to resolve with Ian. We would be expecting to bring our audit results report to your February meeting and then sign off following that meeting ahead of the 28th of February backstop date. And that audit results report, as I say, how we have undertaken the audit, what assurance we have got from the procedures in that year that we can provide to you. And then it will be a disclaimed audit opinion again, because the opening balance issue that we have, but there will be a map for you to show what we've done and where we've got the assurances.
Lovely, thank you. That clear with everybody? Sorry, Councillor, could you turn your mic off? Thanks. Right, thank you. Brings us on to agenda item 10, internal audit progress report. Sorry, I renumbered everything because of throwing that extra item in. So can I ask Rachel Ashley-Corn to introduce this item? Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the latest update on the delivery of this year's internal audit plan. So just talking members briefly through the key sections of the report. So from page 199 of the pack, page 5 of the appendix is a copy of this year's internal audit plan with all of the assignments of the progress as at the time of producing this report, which has moved on further since, and the outcomes of any of those which have been finalised, in addition to all of the other pieces of work that we deliver as well. So since the last progress report for this committee, we have finalised a further 2 of the audits within the plan. So these key findings are summarised in section 2.3 of the report, pages 2 and 3 of the appendix, and 196 of the full paper pack. So the first audit was in relation to decision making and delegation. So this was very much within the governance side of the audit plan, to give us assurance over how decisions are being made, how those are being recorded to ensure transparency and compliance with the relevant regulations. So overall, we were really satisfied with the control environment in terms of the general management of publicising and producing minutes from meetings, recording decision lists, in sample testing that we performed, 100% of the meetings that were selected had evidence of minutes and decision lists published in a timely manner and available online. And when we also looked at the procedure notes within the team as well, they were, I think the description used by the team was very comprehensive. They were very detailed and gave us assurance over continuity of those controls in practice. One of the areas that we highlighted where we did make some recommendations was around the publication of delegated decisions. So where a decision has been made under delegated authority. So we can see these were being publicised regularly within environmental services. So that was already well established, but we didn't see any wider delegated decisions being published. So we've made some recommendations around ensuring that the controls are in place to ensure all of those decisions are published in the expected way. And also made some recommendations around the forms in place for that, with an action plan in place that's being taken forward by the team to ensure those are published in the right manner going forward. So that was reflected in the control environment, where we gave a moderate assurance opinion in relation primarily brought down because of the delegated decision controls. Compliance we found was good generally with those controls that were in place and were operating well. And we've given a medium organisational impact overall based on those findings. The second audit was in relation to supporting vulnerable people. So it was quite a large audit, really. It turned into quite a large audit because the council has so much in place, actually, that it exceeded our expectations in terms of the number of policies and procedures in place to support vulnerable members of the public across the area. So we looked at a number of policies and procedures. We looked at mandatory training for staff, which covered a number of key areas that we were expected to see. There were a number of new strategies in place as well, which had supporting action plans. So whilst the strategies were very new, so we couldn't necessarily assess the progress that had been made, we were reassured that action plans were in place, and there are also mechanisms in place within the data management systems to monitor and record that information and ensure that those are reported on going forward and reported back to members in terms of progress. So overall, we were satisfied there were a number of programmes in place. And again, as I say, the audit file for this was quite large, considering the number of strategies and the work that's underway. So overall, we were able to give a good level of assurance for compliance, and indeed our highest level of assurance for the control environment was substantial and with no significant areas of concern to highlight, and a low organisational impact on that basis overall. So also within the report is the latest of our real-time risk assurance reviews within section 2.5 of the report, and also the separate appendix, table 3 from the report as well. So just to remind members, these are not audits, but this is us trying to give you some assurance over the risk management approach within the authority. So with these, what we do is select one of the council's risk entries from the strategic risk register, and we are not assessing, we're not auditing the area, but what we literally do is go through the risk entry and see whether the wording actually reflects what's in practice. So where there's a control that reduces the risk score from the inherent risk score to the current risk score, you're obviously relying on those listed controls. So what we try to do is just confirm those controls are actually in place as is described in the risk entry. So we've given in table 3 from page 9 of the appendix, or page 203 of the papers. We've just run through each of those entries, and this was in relation to risk entry C7, which was the new risk entry in relation to climate change. And we made recommendations in relation to the first and the second entries on the control list within that risk entry, where we've just suggested some further detail would be beneficial to really clarify what we have in place in terms of those controls. But overall, we were able to give good level of assurance over those other areas that were referenced. And finally, we have in table 2 an update on the implementation of actions arising from audit work. And I'm very pleased to say that you have no overdue audit actions as a council, which is probably a position I don't think I've reported elsewhere. So that's a very nice place to be. Obviously, we continue to monitor that any of those that are not yet due will continue to be followed up, but that's certainly a clean bill of health in terms of those actions overall. The only other thing I was going to mention in relation to other work, so we do also provide a number of days for proactive support around counter fraud. This is actually International Fraud Awareness Week as we sit here today, so we have delivered some promotion around that and supported the council in producing some material for staff awareness, just to make sure everybody's alert to the risks of fraud. And I think that's everything from me, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you,
Rachel. Very encouraging. Members, we're asked to note the progress made by internal audit in the delivery of the audit plan and the key findings. Can I have a proposal and seconder for the recommendation?
I'd like to propose that, Chair.
Thank you, councillor Organ. Can I have a seconder?
I'm happy to second.
Thank you, councillor Bentley. Any comments or questions to Rachel at this stage? Councillor Petty.
Thank you, very good and clear report. Thank you for the voiceover, also clear. And I think the committee should note that there are no overdue actions, actually. It's that's quite rare in my experience, both as an auditor and an auditee. And I think that's a positive indicator that something's working. I have two questions. On the decision-making and delegation audit, did the audit highlight any examples where a decision had been taken by someone who shouldn't have made that decision?
Through you, Chair.
Please.
No, so we didn't identify any instances of that during the audit. As we say, obviously the issue we had was around delegated decisions, and if they're not recorded, we don't know of them. So it's difficult. We could obviously test those that had been recorded. Those that hadn't been recorded, obviously we couldn't perform those tests on. So that's why we want to make sure that those are being fully captured and recorded going forward.
Absolutely.
I understand. Shall I ask my second question? Yeah. On page 10 of your report, 204, the key control around the annual climate change budget, just two comments, just to link it with something else I've already said about the necessity of longer term financial planning for this. And if that's not already happening, I really think it needs to. And secondly, it's all well and good allocating a budget, but is there a key control around when that budget is spent, evidencing that it's actually achieved something? You know, value for money has been achieved.
Rachel.
So I just come back on that I fully agree with that, and obviously that's the recommendation, is to try and expand that, because that's we didn't feel that the wording at the moment of annual climate change budget was sufficient. We wanted to understand what's actually going to be implemented, how we're going to measure the progress and the difference that makes as a control measure. So absolutely agree on that as well.
Ian, would you like to follow on with that as well?
Yeah, in relation to the environmental plan, report goes to our Operational Service Committee in July each year, I think, which details what the money's been spent on and the impact that has had.
Thanks, Ian. Councillor Petty, did you have something you want?
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to echo what Stephen had already said about how positive it was to see that there are no overdue actions. Really positive. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that would be unanimously voiced around the table. Right, members, do we need to debate this further, or are we happy to note progress? Happy to note progress or debate?
If I may, it was, yeah, it's not sure if it's a question or an observation. I see the term carbon net zero by a date banded around. Seen that a lot over the last 20 years. I worked in environmental services. I've seen people struggle to actually quantify what carbon net zero actually means. Yeah. So it probably is going to turn into a question. So do you, as far as I know, this is maybe slightly getting slightly technical here, but do you get a sense of that East Cambridgeshire District Council is starting to actually truly understand what carbon net zero actually is? Because I think, to be fair, by 2036, you know, we're not going to be able to stop using anything that produces carbon emissions, hence the reason why we're going carbon net zero. And therefore we need a definition, a really good handle on what we mean by that. Are we getting there, do you feel?
Do you want to?
Through you, Chair. I think it would be difficult for me to comment on that, because as I said, this isn't an audit. So all we've done at this stage is just confirm whether the controls that are listed on the risk entry are in place. If the committee was so minded, obviously the next agenda item is talking about next year's internal audit plan. If that is something you wanted to dig into further and get further assurances around, that's something that you may wish to put forward as something for audit coverage, then we could get into that kind of level of depth a little bit more.
Also strikes me,
Thank you.
it's a sort of we need to understand the policy issues through Operational Services Committee.
Perfect. Yeah, tell us.
Right, do we, anything further? Put the recommendation to the meeting, all in favour? We note progress. Yep. Item 11 or item 10, internal audit plan development for 2025-26. Rachel, over to you again, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is just a brief paper just to make the committee aware of the intended process for development of next year's internal audit plan. And how that relates to the standards, to give you assurance that we will end up with a risk-based audit plan that gives you the assurances you need as a local authority. So it's just setting out briefly the key stages that we will go through to develop and inform the audit plan. So looking at risk registers, understanding the corporate plan, consultation with key members of staff to understand their assurance requirements for the year ahead. I've also aligned it within the report in section 3 around the key standards. So the current standards we work to, the public sector internal audit standards, but also an input into the global internal audit standards as well, and the insight into what they require, which I don't consider to be hugely different, but obviously we do need to make sure we're covering off all of those requirements as well. So under the process that we're under at the moment, so I'm currently collating that information and started to do that horizon scanning. I will be then consulting with members of the council's management team to understand and look at their risk entries and drill into that and understand what's happening in the year ahead, whether that's any changes in policies, changes in procedures, changes in legislation, so on. That may increase the risk profile around certain areas. I also have included, of course, in their consultation with this committee as one of the customers of the internal audit service, really, and receivers of that governance and assurance. So I just wanted to open that as well as a kind of a starting point of that consultation with yourselves. I don't expect you to come up with a list of areas today that you want me to consider in terms of the audit plan, but I'm more than happy to receive any areas of concern or any areas that you highlight of risk where you require assurance during the year ahead. That wouldn't necessarily definitely make it onto the audit plan, but it would feed into that risk assessment process, and we'd highlight that against other areas, compare that with other sources of assurance that we have and see where we need to prioritise our resource in that year. So, as I say, I'm more than happy to receive any suggestions outside of the meeting, ideally by the end of January, to feed into that process to make sure that I have a plan ready to bring to you at the meeting in March for review and approval at that stage. So
Rachel, just on that specific point, because our meeting in February is scheduled for Monday the 3rd, might it be an idea to change your date from the 31st of January to the 3rd of February? And then if we could have a sort of an amalgamated list to present to you as a committee.
Yes, I'm more than happy to do that.
Would that be okay?
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be a good idea.
Is that okay with others? Let's put that on the agenda for that meeting. You know, if we feed in advance to put it onto that paper. Right, sorry.
That's everything, Chair. I'm happy to take any other questions.
Thank you. Well, from Chair, I'm happy to propose the recommendation as set out in 2.1 and 2.2, subject to that change of date from 31st of January to 3rd of February. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pettit. Any further comments or questions to Rachel at this stage? Right, we'll just comment from the Chair. I think I know we're bringing it to the 3rd of February, but be remiss not to say we're going to need the bereavement centre on that list for next year. I know you're doing one already, but we need to keep a close eye on that. Right, and if there's no further comments or questions, don't think we need to debate this any further, do we? No? All in favour? Thank you. Right, that brings us on to the forward agenda plan. Patrick, I've just added that one bit to the February meeting about internal audit plan development. Do you have any other items you wish to tell us about for the forward plan? If not, I'll declare the meeting closed.
Chair, can I just check that the start time of 4:30 is correct?
We usually do. Because we changed the date of this one, not everybody could get here for 4:30 because of other commitments. So this is a one-off meeting at 6.